Are you? Yeah. I wish I was 60. Give me those 10 years back. It looks like my knees are falling apart. I know. You having trouble? Yeah. You know, I do stuff for a while and then I don't. You know, I exercise and things like that. But this morning I was up at 5 o'clock and they see me and I'm like, okay, it's the time. Abby's coming home. That's why I don't get she's in Oregon right now. Yeah, she and Ado graduated physical therapy school and they wanted to do some travel therapy for a while and make a little more money and get some experience in the world, you know, and so they moved to Oregon, and it wasn't a travel job, it was just a permanent job because they stopped it all because of COVID. So they moved out to Southern Oregon, and they went skiing, snowboarding yesterday, every weekend they're out hiking and having fun. Absolutely. Well, she's coming home Wednesday night. And I told Abby, I said, you got to get me on track again so I don't have to pay somebody. You know, tell me everything I need to do, and then she can go back home.
I've got trouble with one knee.
Do you?
This time, and I've been through a couple of processes. This time I thought this doesn't work. It's painful.
Did you tear like
It started, I tore my meniscus like some years ago, and then they went in and fixed that one.
Right.
Arthritis because of that. So now I've got arthritis in the knee, and I've lost the tissue.
Is it bone on bone now? Oh, yeah.
Knee injections.
Yes.
Give me injections. Physical therapy.
Yeah.
I have to go back again because there isn't something that fixes it.
No. Not to knee replacement yet. The doctor said that. He said,
Physical therapy so you don't get to it.
I know. No. So, yes, Abby will be home. She and Ada are both physical therapists. Yeah, doctor.
Doctor here when they're young like that.
Yeah.
That's fun. Jerry and I did that too. You know, he was in the Navy and he traveled. And then settled back home. And I'm hoping that, and I think so. I think Abby and Ada are going to come back into the area. And then maybe in a couple of years when they decide to have a family. I don't know if I can get her or Grant to live in Illinois because of all the taxes and the craziness, you know. But I said, you know, the grass is not always green. There's just problems and differences. Yeah. You know, and Grant lives in St. Peters over in Missouri, and yeah, so I don't think he's going to move back either, you know, because his wife has to live 30 minutes from the hospital. She's an OR nurse, you know, and so.
That's free.
Is that Mercy?
At Mercy, yeah.
Well, they're close enough to see.
Yeah. I just, but, you know, if they have kids, right now they have a dog and cats, and I don't know if they want to have kids, but if they have kids, I said, guys, you know, how many 10 minutes for me? I can babysit, which I do 3 days a week, you know, but that's kind of far for me to drive in the morning and for them to come to me. Who knows? Never meant to be. Buddy, let's go.
We never got to babysit for our grandkids.
Where's Holly's right
There
here?
you go. You need one? I know. She is. She's headstrong. She's just like her mother.
Oh, that sounds like Sarah's little one. Only she's not little anymore.
Yeah, just like her mother. It's crazy. But that's okay.
Those teeth flow
That
through.
is okay.
This one was pretty headstrong.
Yeah. That is okay.
Are you still headstrong?
On some things.
We never
But I've learned
think,
how to handle it.
we never think that, do we?
Oh. Okay, come on. Grandma's probably sitting in the car.
Yeah.
What German have you ever heard that was not headstrong? Come on.
Right. for myself. So that's
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
one brother and two sisters. There's four of us.
And where are you at in the,
I'm the youngest.
I'm the youngest of six.
Boys and girls?
3 boys, 3 girls. I have a sister,
I
Rita.
knew you had the two sisters, but I didn't know.
Yeah. And then my brother Pat, he lives with us also. My other 2 brothers and my sister's gone. Yeah.
I still have all my
Yeah, it's
sisters and
wonderful.
brother. My one sister, Karen, we prayed for, has pancreatic cancer
Oh,
and Parkinson's.
oh, which one?
Karen Lady.
Oh, that's your sister?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh.
And the other sister doesn't have too many health issues, a little bit. She has AFib, but her husband has major health issues.
Oh.
She's the oldest girl. She's just, it's too much stress on her. She's not doing it.
Aw.
Because she's all alone. Her kids have moved away.
Oh.
Well, her son lives close enough that he tries to help her. He's working every day.
Yeah. They have their own life. don't they?
Yeah, they do. And their own kids, their own
Yeah.
families, yeah, so. But I still have them all.
After effects of your shot. But you know where I got it a day later. That was this art.
Leroy was saying he was over there too.
Yeah.
Busy as well as must look at everything.
Yeah, you shot right on.
Is he coming back?
If you need to ride home, I'm glad to give you a ride home. Well, we have to study it the day before.
Yeah, it's a little different, I guess, in that, I mean, I give them the questions, but they haven't, we go through this question, but they're never in the same order as they sit here, so that they really don't have any idea of the questions, but they do have the questions. Yeah, I don't know that I did either. Is really just a study guide of information, and then there's like a quiz that's practice questions, but I don't know if it's the same ones they ask. So, yeah.
Specifically, we're looking at verses 11 through 26 today. Of Matthew 27. But first, let's open with a word of prayer. Holy God, we thank you for sending your only Son, Jesus Christ, to come to this earth in human flesh to save us from our sins. And this Passion Week, I pray that you would have us all focus our hearts and minds on you and the suffering that your Son suffered for us. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Okay, so first, just for an introduction, does anyone have a story about being falsely accused? Has any of you ever been falsely accused? I guess first is the first question. Yeah, Josh, yeah? Do you have a specific thought in mind of when that happened?
Not that would be appropriate for church.
He said not that would be appropriate for church. Yeah, that's fair enough. Anybody else been ever falsely accused of really anything in your life?
Speeding.
Speeding?
I'm not sure it was false. So.
Right. Not sure if it was false, though. Yeah, I think everybody might have been falsely accused of speeding. Well, in our pericope today, Jesus is definitely falsely accused of these crimes. We're going to see how he responds to that, how Pilate responds to knowing his innocence, and what kind of just comes out of everything, why Jesus is crucified. So first, let's just set the scene. We discussed last week about the arrest of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and since then, Peter has famously denied Christ 3 times, at least in the story of Matthew, in the courtyard outside the palace of Pontius Pilate. Now we are going into the courtroom to see Jesus stand trial against the accusations of the Jewish leaders and priests. And also a good thing to keep in mind as we go throughout this story is that Christ has been predicting throughout the entire narrative of Matthew that he will indeed be delivered to be crucified, emphasis there on crucified. So crucifixion is only something, though, that the Romans can carry out. It's not something that the Jewish leaders are going to be able to do to Christ. They can't be the ones who persecute him. It has to be the Romans who carry out the crucifixion and deliver him to be crucified, which is something that he has been said he's going to happen to him throughout when he goes to Jerusalem. And so, because of all that, we come to Pontius Pilate, and he's kind of the main character, so to speak, in our story. So, first, what do we know about Pontius Pilate? Just an open question. What do you know about Pontius Pilate? Governor of Galilee area, right? Judea, sure.
He was married.
He was married? Mm-hmm.
Telling him what to do.
Sorry. Because he was married because his wife is telling him what to do. Yeah. That's about right. Sure, these are all good things. And actually, the kind of stunned silence is appropriate because we don't know much. Yeah. Yeah, okay. He was sort of an agnostic, saying what is truth. I kind of like that. He was pagan, right? Because he's Roman, so Roman gods were, it's kind of up to the interpretation whether they thought they actually existed. Certainly many did, but that you could have had Roman pagans who didn't know if there was a God who exists and don't know what truth is. Yeah, that's a good observation. But yeah, so these are all good thoughts about Pontius Pilate. Once again, though, we really don't know much about Pontius Pilate in terms of who he was. The only sources we really have are the Gospels. We do have a couple stories from Josephus. He was a first century Jewish historian. But besides that, we only really have the Gospels to form what we know about Pontius Pilate. So I've done some research on who Pontius Pilate is from what others have pulled from these texts to determine what he is. So first, he was the prefect of Judea, so Galilee, Judea, from AD 26 to 36. 10 years, 11 years. Doesn't really sound all that long, but actually that was an extraordinary amount of time for somebody to be kind of ruling in power, especially in the Judean area. Very hostile place. I mean, it still is, but especially back then too. The political tensions between Rome, the governing authority, and the Jews in Judea, it was very large. It was something that continually built over just many centuries, specifically 2nd and 1st BC, during some Jewish revolts. And so now Pilate is the Roman authority within Judea and Jerusalem. And so people don't like him, so to speak. He would be seen kind of as like this governing authority that many probably wouldn't take too kindly to. So more history on that, though. We all know about King Herod, right? King Herod the Great, he was the king when Jesus was born, and he said to the wise men, go find you this child so that I can then go and worship him because he's the king of the Jews. That's what the wise men say. But really, the king of the Jews would have been a title that Herod had, which is more reason why he would have been more upset for them saying we're going to search out the king of the Jews. But once Herod dies, his son takes over, but Rome doesn't like that his son takes over. And so they kind of just do away with his son, and they put in these prefects, these Roman prefects. There's 7 of them after Herod's son. And Pontius Pilate is the 5th of 7 prefects. And they go until, I don't remember quite the date, but it's about AD 50 is like the last prefect, and then I can't quite remember what happens after that. But yes, Pontius Pilate is the 5th. And because Pilate was the ruler of Judea, and he's kind of Rome's representative, he held absolute authority just over the region. He didn't need to really talk to anyone in the region in terms of what he was going to do, whether it be a trial like we're going to see today, or whether it be taxes. Rome would help set him up with taxes, but he would be the one who enforced it, right? He was the guy. Everything went through him. Pontius Pilate's the man to go talk to if you want anything done. So it makes a lot of sense that the Jewish rulers who have just arrested Christ take him to Pontius Pilate, right? Right, if there was a capital punishment specifically too as a result of a case, Pilate is the one who had to see it through. He had to be the one saying, yes, this person is going to be delivered over to be crucified. And I was discussing how there's these big political tensions between Rome and Jerusalem and Judea, and Pilate actually was pretty culpable at balancing these tensions as he was prefect for 10 years. That was a really long time. Most of the prefects maybe were only there for like 4 years. But Pilate, he was trusted by Rome, so they saw him as a good leader and holding on to these political tensions in balance, and so he didn't cause more tensions that would fall. And furthermore, we know that this is true because, does anybody know who Caiaphas is? He's the high priest, exactly. Caiaphas is the high priest in Jerusalem during all these things, and the high priest in Jerusalem was seen as the Jewish ruler. He was like the head for the Jews in Jerusalem, right? So they saw him as a great ruler. They didn't really care for the prefect. Pontius Pilate and the Roman prefect, normally what they would do is kind of just displace this high priest and get rid of him and replace him with somebody of their own, so that way they didn't have to work with the Jewish side. But Pontius Pilate didn't do that. He just said, hey, I'm going to work with you guys, and he kept Caiaphas in power, and they worked together. So Pontius Pilate, he works with Jews in order to maintain balance. So another crucial thing to think about him as we read this story. Any questions about Pontius Pilate, comments, thoughts, before we move on here? Yeah.
It isn't with Pilate so much as the relationship between the Jews and the Romans. Today's reading for the sermon had to do with a battalion of soldiers that were brought into this trial, which seems like excessive. And then the one that hit me today, and I thought before, is they mocked him, and then they spit on him, and it seems to me that's very disrespectful to spit on someone. And I wonder if that, when people say that was related to the Roman dislike for Jews, because or was it they didn't like Jesus?
Right.
And I can't imagine Jesus had done stuff that these soldiers would be. They had to deal with the Jews every day. I'm guessing it's more towards the Jew, the antagonistic.
Yeah. Yeah, so the comment made, just to summarize, was basically like, it may not necessarily just be that the Jews hold contempt for the Romans, but it's the other way around certainly as well. The Romans hold contempt maybe for the Jews, and that's why in our gospel reading today it was from Mark. We're in Matthew, but in Mark certainly there's these, and actually in Matthew, the Roman soldiers spit on Jesus and they mock him, and perhaps that's not just because they saw Jesus and hated Jesus, but it's more that they hated the Jewish culture, and that could certainly be true because in the first and second century BC, like there were tons of riots and revolts by the Jewish people, and they were just a real pain in the butt for the Romans to try and keep them under control, right? And so it would make sense for there to be contempt on that side as well. Any other thoughts? Mm-hmm.
Did you see with keeping Caiaphas in charge, got to be in the head of the Jews? And then as we see in the narrative today, presents with a murderer and just some guy that's saying, he's the king of the Jews and everything. And he's trying to get them to just send Barabbas back into prison. Like, we can see that. But at the same time, he's got two motives. He wants to keep the peace, and I don't think he really wants to crucify Jesus. I mean, of course he washes his hands in it, which we read in one of the others.
This is Matthew says that.
In
yeah.
Matthew, okay. Then we're going to get to it. I'm ahead of it.
No, yeah, but you're right, Hannah. We see in this pericope that we're about to read that it's even more evidence that he's trying to keep the peace, really. It's kind of just a good summary. Josh, you have something to add?
Oh, yeah, honestly, it seems like he just doesn't even care, like, at all. He's just like, whatever you want. Like, I mean, you want this murderer to go free? Sure, why not? Just whatever it takes to keep the peace.
Right. Yeah, so Josh said he doesn't care about maybe necessarily who's crucified or what happens as long as the peace is kept. And his priority here is political peace. I think it's evident. That's what the people back in first century Palestine or in the first century Christian world reading Matthew, that's what they would have had in mind. Pilate's trying to keep the peace. So also one more little thing. A trial in Roman times, I think we all, we think maybe of Roman democracy or Greek democracy, that past time. They were the ones who invented democracy and had these fair trials. That would not have been the case for Jesus, right? The fair trial would have only been for a Roman citizen, and a Roman citizen would have been somebody who was highborn. Probably, they didn't necessarily need to live in Rome, but that would help. Whereas Jesus is this low-born man from Galilee who's just a Jew, right? So he doesn't get a fair trial in the sense that we think of it, where he has a jury and he has not necessarily a lawyer. I guess he could be his own lawyer, but in the story he is his own lawyer. But he doesn't have that trial where it's a jury and a judge. Rather, Pilate is the judge, jury, and executioner, right? It's just he has to convince Pilate, and that's it. The rule of law doesn't really apply to Jesus, yeah.
The accusations from the Pharisees and that, he doesn't get to see them in court, right?
So he has the accusations from the Pharisees, and
Pilate already does.
yeah, Pilate has the
You
accusations.
don't get to face your accuser like you would in a normal trial.
Yeah, so that's true. There are going to be like some high Jewish leaders with Pilate there, because Pilate once again wants to like maintain peace. He wants to hear what they are thinking as well. But you're right that Jesus wouldn't be facing them and questioning them. He's only talking to Pilate, because Pilate is the judge and jury in the trial, so to speak. Does that answer your thought or question?
It's a big deal that, they get to put out the accusations and he doesn't get to answer with them involved. Basically, Pilate's got cards already played by the Pharisees.
Mm-hmm.
What's Jesus supposed to do?
Right. The comment was that it's kind of a rigged deal against Jesus, the whole thing, because the other side's holding all the cards. Jesus has none, so he doesn't really have a choice. Yeah, Hannah.
Is that necessarily true, though, from what we heard today in Mark, where Pilate is saying, here are all these accusations that they say against you, what have you to say? And Jesus, no response. And then it says Pilate was amazed.
Right.
So is he hearing it, or is Jesus not hearing what the Pharisees are saying?
So, yeah, I think both of you are correct. Basically, he is hearing all the accusations of the Jewish leaders and the Sanhedrin, but he's not being able to question them and address them. He's only addressing Pilate. So everything's going through Pilate. He's the mediator is a tough word, but he is, I guess. He's trying to keep the peace, right? So he is able to say things. He is his own lawyer, but he chooses not to. And I think that's actually a great segue just into the text, because that's like the first 3-4 verses of the text. So first, let's look at Matthew 27, verses 11 through 14. I will read. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear now the many things they testify against you?" But he gave no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. So the term king of the Jews is a loaded term. We already, in prefacing this, the idea was that Herod was the king of the Jews, right? And then he was replaced. Herod had an alliance with Rome, but Herod was still the king of the Jews, kind of a puppet king of the Jews. But then he was replaced with these Roman prefects. So what does this, when Pilate hears this term, what is he thinking? Like, what does Pilate think of the term king of the Jews? Yeah.
Kind of an honorary title doesn't mean anything because who's king of the Jews? There is no king of the Jews. I'm in charge of the Jews.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It was kind of an honorary title because there is no king of the Jews. Yeah.
No, but then there could be a revolt where the Jews said, hey, we're going to have our own king. Now we're going to go against Herod.
Right, exactly. And that's the other side of the coin, too, is that it could mean that Jesus is being called the king of the Jews. Oh, they're going to lift him up as their king and leader, and there's going to be a revolt. There's going to be this big fight and war and battle that happens within Judea because this man was called the king of the Jews and is being lifted up as this leader. And even more so, Jesus keeps saying, Jesus would not deny that he's the king of the Jews, though. But the sense of the question is, are you the king of the Jews? It's maximum political innuendo, right? It's just political to the max, because that's all that Pilate's thinking about, is how political this is. Yeah.
Well, I think too, so he's the king of the Jews in the Roman world, so what? I mean, again, I feel like, what power would he have even if he was the king of the Jews? It's sort of like a moot point for Pilate, like, why are we bothering with this? But then, if he does open his mouth, what comes out from a guy, Pilate doesn't understand scripture, whatnot. I mean, Jesus may come off looking like he's lost, like he's the Looney Tunes, start talking about stuff that Pilate doesn't understand. So if he would have said something, it might have been even a worse scenario.
Right, and I think that's why he didn't say something, right? But yeah, the idea is that maybe the comment made was that Pilate maybe doesn't really care if you're the king of the Jews. It doesn't matter at this point. What kind of power would that truly hold in the Roman world? And it would hold zero, but the idea of it leading to a revolt is the main issue at hand. And also, the real king of the Jews, you could say, the real political king of the Jews is Pilate himself, because he's the one who's like Lord over them. He's the one who is governing over them. He's the true king of the Jews for the time being, at least. Until there's another Roman prefect, because he is in the stead of King Herod, who, 40 years ago was the king of the Jews. So now Pilate is really the king of the Jews. And we've kind of discussed it, but does this charge hold any weight? Does this political charge hold any weight against Christ? And a follow-up even more to that is, could Jesus dispute it? Sure. So this charge brought against Jesus, specifically in the mind of the Pharisees and the chief priests, maybe not in the mind of the Pharisees and the chief priests, but in the mind of Pilate, the charge is, you are this political king of the Jews who might be attempting to lead a new nation or a revolt against me. Does that charge hold any weight actually against Jesus? And can Jesus dispute that charge? Could Jesus say something that would make Pilate think, oh, wait, no, this guy is okay? Right. Yeah, exactly. That's the idea, is that Jesus could easily just say, no, I am not this political ruler. My kingdom is not of this world. Something he says all the time. His kingdom is in heaven with his Father, right? So he could easily dispute the charge that he is the political king of the Jews, yet he does not say anything, which we might find as odd, yeah.
Did they illegally switch the charge of blasphemy to treason?
So, did the Pharisees, you mean?
Yeah, because the Pharisees are mad because he claimed to be the Son of God.
Right.
It's blasphemy. And when they send him before the powers, they say that it's treason.
Right. And I think, so the question is, did the Pharisees illegally switch the charge from blasphemy to treason? And they certainly did, it seems. But I wouldn't, and the reason for that is because they know that Pilate is not going to care if this guy is the Son of God, right? What is that? What does that mean for Pilate? I mean, he's a Roman pagan, right? That he understands the Jewish culture in some sense. We see with like he releases a prisoner at the feast, so he does understand certain things about their culture. But the Pharisees needed to bring a charge that Pilate could then like carry out the crucifixion of, right? He's not going to crucify him for saying he's the Son of God, but he'll crucify him for saying he's the King of the Jews who's going to, lead a revolt against Caesar, right? Was there a hand? Yeah.
Pilate had plenty of, what you want to call it, the equivalent of the KGB or the, CIA.
Mhm.
If Jesus was planning an insurrection, they'd have, come across some camp somewhere where people were, gathered up and working on their spears or whatever. So he would have known if Jesus was really wanting to overtake his power. So I don't think Pilate felt threatened at all, probably.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought of it that way. But Pilate probably had his own personal intel, inside intel, that he would have known if there was probably a Jewish revolt brewing in the Judean region. And because of that, Pilate may not think that this charge really holds that much weight anyway. And we kind of see that for Pilate, it really doesn't hold that much weight, right? Because Jesus doesn't refute the term to Pilate. Jesus just says to him, "You have said so," like it is. And that's also a very weird thing for Jesus to say. Jesus is kind of a weird guy. But he is. Especially in Mark, but Matthew, as well. He's just a very weird guy. And him saying, "You have said so," it was tough for me to really come to an understanding of what this means, but it's kind of just, he's inviting Pilate to reflect on what he just said, is kind of where I settled on it. He wants Pilate to think, what did you just say? You have just said, you are the King of the Jews. Well, you have said so. So Pilate reflects back onto what maybe that truly means. It was tough, yeah.
I have a line of thoughts here, so bear with me for a minute.
Sure.
But we're with Jesus in the garden beforehand, and he's asking God, if there's a way to take this cup from me, please do it, but let your will be done. And the answer was no. That's what we were talking about last week. So now, Jesus, he's not thinking politically. He's not with Pilate. He is thinking about saving the world. And so he knows that this cup isn't going to pass from him. And so he's not going to try and defend himself. He's not going to, because we have already established here that he could very easily do that and say, hey, I'm not insurgent. I'm not trying to raise a riot of people. I'm not some sort of political power. But that's not on his agenda right now. He's not looking to save himself. He's looking to save everyone.
Yeah, that's a great continuation from last week, was the idea that Jesus says in the garden, "Father, take this cup away from me." And then the answer is no. And so Jesus is carrying out the will of the Father even now in this trial. And so he's not worried about disputing whether he is this political king of the Jews. He's worried about carrying out the will of the Father. And that's why he's silent, right? That's why he doesn't say anything. Josh.
I also think it's honestly kind of, well, obviously it's smart because Jesus did it, but it's smart the way that he responded. Pilate's like, are you the king of the Jews? And he's like, I mean, they said so, so I guess.
Mhm.
You know, it's that they're saying it. I didn't say that I am necessarily, but so he's not lying, but he's also not agreeing with that. He's saying, well, they said so, so.
Yeah, he's really leaving it up to Pilate, right, to figure it out. He's not defending himself. He's not denying it. He is just him. He is Jesus, right? And so, well, let's quickly flip to Isaiah 53. Really famous, but I mean, Christ is fulfilling so many prophecies throughout all of his time in Judea and Jerusalem, and his whole ministry in Galilee. 53:7 is where we specifically are. And this, of course, is one of the famous Isaiah servant songs where Isaiah talks of this servant who will do the will of the Father and go all the way to death. And specifically in 53:7, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. So another reason, perhaps, why Jesus was silent, he was fulfilling Old Testament prophecy. He was fulfilling Isaiah's prophecy of the servant songs. And ultimately, he's fulfilling the will of the Father, right? That's why he's silent, and that's why he's even in the trial in the first place, is because he is fulfilling the will of the Father by going all the way to the cross to save the world. So finally, just an open question. Why do you guys think Pilate was amazed by Jesus being silent? I thought that was odd. I don't know why Pilate would think it's cool or amazing in some sense. Yeah.
Well, first of all, when you've got somebody standing trial, they're going to be so scared and nervous. They're thinking about what's going to be happening to them, and usually they'd be crying or pleading or something. He's standing there. You know, he's not asking for pardon. He's not asking for, to be released. He's not, begging. To see somebody stand there with that much confidence and still love you, show that. That's a great thing to look upon someone like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. The comment is that, like, if you are standing trial, if you're this low-born Galilean Jew, and you would be scared out of your mind trying to plead your case as much as you can, but Jesus just stands there still and says nothing. So that is probably quite amazing. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
And the thought of Jesus being famous in the area, I'm sure he's not just somebody that Pilate didn't at least hear about, because he was constantly teaching and performing miracles and not creating rebellion, but definitely creating a following. And I'm sure the people in the area are like, okay, who are we following today?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, there's this guy named Jesus. So he's got all of this quote unquote clout, and yet he stands there and he's not using a bit of it.
Right.
And I think Pilate's more dumbfounded than amazed. He just can't believe that this guy with all of this, all these little gurus, and he's not saying anything.
Right. Another great point. Jesus probably had a bunch of, to use the word clout, it's a great word. It's great for this instance. He had a lot of notoriety in the region because of who he was and his following and his teachings and his works. So you'd think he might use some of that to defend himself, but he doesn't, which is pretty amazing. Yeah.
Honestly, I think it might even go so far as to say, like, he didn't say anything because he couldn't really say anything that would have helped, that wouldn't be lying. Because think about it, is he trying to take over Jerusalem and, the world afterwards? Well, yeah, he is, eventually, just not right now.
Right.
So that may not be his purpose now, but to say that he is not trying to overthrow him is a lie. That's not true.
Right. Yeah, another good point is that ultimately Jesus on the last day, he's going to sit on the throne of David and he will rule over Jerusalem and the entirety of new creation. So it would be a lie in some sense to say that he is not going to eventually be this king of all, right?
I think too, I think there's a possibility that part of what Jesus is doing is ministering to Pontius Pilate, much like he did with the woman at the well who, tried to some regards, I feel like he put his life and his work in front of Pilate in a way that he would never get to do again. And Pilate's never had to see the chance to see his message. He's heard about the things he's done. But I don't know, maybe that's part of the mystery to Pilate too, is the way he kind of makes him think about what's really going on here.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, another good point. The comment is more that Jesus is ministering to Pilate. He's kind of delivering his message to Pilate through silence almost, and making Pilate wonder about who is this Christ, and what does he mean. So let's move on to the next section, which would be 15 to 23. Matthew 27, 15 to 23. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with this righteous man, for I have suffered much today because of him today in a dream." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Christ. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they just shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So the kind of focal verse of this section is verse 17. It's a question posed by Pilate, right? He's saying, "Who do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus?" And in this question, he's trying to discern really the true agendas of the Jewish leaders. Are they just being petty because Jesus is someone that's stealing all of their thunder, right? If that's true, and they're just trying to get rid of him because he's stealing all their thunder, that's pretty petty, and they should probably release Christ and keep Barabbas, right? That would show their true intentions. Or do they actually see Jesus as some sort of a threat to them and their way of life? Because if they decide to release a murderous prisoner back into society, that runs contrary to what they would want, because honestly, the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders, they don't really want to revolt either. They're doing fine. They're doing fine leading the people. They don't really need a revolt. But Barabbas is somebody that could easily, maybe start something and start a brewing revolt. And him being released in society goes against what the Pharisees want and what Pilate wants. And so he is clearly the terrible choice in this question. On the other hand, but if they released Jesus, that would easily call their bluff, right? It'd be like, yeah, you guys were full of it, and you never really thought Jesus was anything. And so this question hangs in 17, and then there are three different factors that come into play, and it's verse by verse that we see in the narrative. And the first one, Pilate knows that the Jewish leaders specifically are already quite envious of Christ, and so he already knows that they're kind of stealing their thunder in some sense, and they are jealous of him, and they want him kind of to be delivered up for that. Pilate wants to see if that's the only factor, if that's the true driving factor. Second, in verse 19, Pilate's wife has a dream revealing to her that Christ is a righteous man. This only heightens the innocence of Christ seen in the story, right? Because there is this pagan woman who is easily able to see that Christ is innocent and righteous, and she is open to the voice of God in the dream, but the Jewish leaders are not. In Matthew, there's a constant theme of people coming, or of God coming to people in dreams. Specifically, Joseph is the one I always think about. There are multiple examples, but I cannot remember any of them besides Joseph right now. But that's a common theme. There is some debate as to whether this dream to Pilate's wife actually follows that theme, but I think it fits really well in that God is speaking to her, a pagan, hey, this man is righteous, do not deliver him over, right? And she suffers for it. That's another interesting kind of phrase, not something I really kind of thought about, but it's the main point of her dream is that Jesus, it's hiding in the innocence of Christ. And then third, finally, probably the most important factor, the crowds have been persuaded by the chief priests and the elders to ask for Barabbas to be released and Jesus to be crucified. Pilate is the sole authority to deliver Christ to be crucified, to deliver anyone to be crucified, right? Pilate has seen through discussing with Jesus that he thinks Jesus is probably innocent. He was amazed by him in his silence. He doesn't really see much of this holding weight. His wife, furthermore, tells him that he's an innocent, righteous man. So everything for Pilate is pointing towards Jesus is innocent. And so the best way for him to maybe get the responsibility off of his hands and off of his heart and off of his mind is maybe just for let the crowds to choose, right? It would be up to the crowds whether they want to crucify Jesus or not. And so that's why the factor of the crowds being persuaded is such a huge factor in the decision. Yeah.
Another thing on top of all of that is that the accusation is he is the king of the Jews. Well, then why the heck do the Jews want to kill him? Obviously, they don't, answer to him or want him because they're saying they're crucifying him. So, I mean, that's just another thing where it's like, okay, well, then the accusation means nothing because
Right.
you can see evidence of that right here.
Yeah, another good point. The accusation of king of the Jews is a silly one if the Jews are the ones that are saying no, like deliver him over to be crucified.
Yeah.
Because if he really was a political threat, it wouldn't be the Jews that are trying to kill him. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, that's another good point as to furthering the innocence of Christ that we just see throughout this narrative, is that Christ is innocent, yet he is being delivered over to be crucified. Like I said, Pilate's trying to absolve himself of responsibility. And he says to the crowds, who do you want me to release, right? It's almost, I don't believe the Greek is emphatic, but it is that sense of who do you, not me, who do you want to release? But nevertheless, it is still Pilate's call. It's not the crowd, as much as the Jewish leaders want him to be crucified. It's ultimately up to Pilate. And so he pleads with them to give him a reason. In that last verse, he's like, please, what evil has he done? Please tell me so I can at least feel okay about delivering him over to be crucified. But all they do is just shout more louder, crucify him. And so Pilate is probably very, very frustrated at this point, just wanting to probably release Christ and Jesus from the sense of the text gives us that idea, but he can't because the crowds say no. And another idea, whose custom is it that allows for a prisoner to be released? So that was what I thought too, but it's actually not. It's actually Pilate's custom. It's Pilate who knows that it's the feast, and he releases for them one prisoner at the feast. It's the governor's custom, so to speak. And so, yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Honestly, a really smart political move. Keep the Jews happy by giving them somebody that you took from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So it's a smart move to give Jews something back in the form of a prisoner at the feast when they're celebrating. But what this further just shows is that it's still Pilate's fault, because it's Pilate's custom that is even the foothold for why Jesus could be freed in the first place, right? It's the foothold for how Pilate is trying to give responsibility away. So Pilate's creating all these things. No, but anyway, any questions or comments before we move on? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So maybe the idea is that Christ could not share his responsibility of dying on the cross with any of us, and Pilate yet tries to share his responsibility of delivering someone over. So it's an interesting dichotomy, perhaps, between the two drawn. Yeah. That's a great point. That was actually in Pastor Cale's sermon today, right? He was talking about how The disciples are completely gone. They are just nowhere, right? Because we saw in the end of chapter 26 in Matthew that Peter denies Christ. And then from then on, we get to the resurrection narrative eventually, and there they are. But throughout all this trial, they're just nowhere because they don't really know what's going on. And they don't know who Jesus is, even though he has told them many times. Peter confessed it, but he still doesn't know who Christ is. So it's interesting that they're just not in the narrative. Yeah.
I always wonder what, the land looked like once Barabbas was released. Like, what happened to him? What kind of chaos ensued after he was released?
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember watching Passion of Christ, just such a powerful film, and just the way that he's going out, like, it seems so dark. And from there, the entire world is getting darker and darker. A murder has just been released out to wreak havoc.
Right. Yeah.
I was wondering.
Yeah, so the comment, and it's good, it's fun to speculate, is what happened with Barabbas, what the world looked like when Barabbas went into the crowd. And there is a Barabbas in Acts who travels around with Paul, I can't quite remember actually, but there was a certain Christian tradition at one point that held that Barabbas and this Barabbas are the same Barabbas, but I don't think that really holds much weight. Although it is fun to think about that. Perhaps Barabbas, I mean, it's a perfect analogy. Barabbas was to be crucified. Jesus took his spot, right? And so now Barabbas is redeemed, and so to speak, to like go out. But it's fun to think about. Right, exactly. What does he do with his freedom? Yeah. Was there a question? No. Okay. So moving on then to perhaps the best part of this pericope, verses 24 to 26. So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a large riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and our children." Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him over to be crucified. So we see, once again in the narrative, Pilate is trying to move responsibility away from himself and onto the people. And he does this in a very clear act of washing his hands. That would have been something that would have been more Jewish in nature at the time, to like wash your hands because you want to be clean for eating and stuff, and that was a very legalistic thing that the Jews and the Pharisees and the chief priests and elders would all have seen, right? And so they see that it's not really pagan in nature, but he does it for them, saying, "Hey, I am clean, I am innocent of this man's blood." But these words ring incredibly hollow because he is the sole authority in terms of sending Christ to the cross, and his own custom is his justification for sending Christ to the cross. But Pilate easily could just say, "No, Jesus is not going to be crucified. It's going to be Barabbas." So ironically, Pilate is not innocent. He's far from it. But only the precious blood of Christ, who's right there, is really the innocent one in this narrative. Christ is the only innocent person in this narrative, not Pilate. But verse 25 is my favorite verse of this whole passage, and it's perhaps the climax of this entire text. So if Pilate's claim is that he is innocent of the blood of Christ, if that claim is false, like we've thought, then what are we to make of the people and what they say? Better phrase, what do the people think they are doing by saying, "His blood be on us and our children"? Like, that's kind of a weird phrase, right? Yeah, it is a terrible phrase. But what are they saying? Like, what are they saying to Pilate?
We take responsibility for it.
Right, we take responsibility. Yeah, this is our doing.
The king of the Jews.
Exactly, yeah. They're just taking full responsibility from Pilate. So they buy into what Pilate's saying, that he's innocent, and they're saying, "Yeah, this guy's on us. His blood, it's on us, it's on our children. If there's any guilt that comes of it, it's on us. It's completely on us," right? Don't you have to worry. It's going to be on us. Yeah, go ahead.
Honestly, I think it could be kind of seen from a point of like they're trying to take that as clout. Like, "Ha, we killed him. What up?" You know, we're the powerful, cool people. You know.
Yeah, perhaps they're the ones that are really in charge, right? Like Pilate seems like he has this authority, but we're the ones that killed this Jewish leader who is saying had this huge following. It's really us. It's really the people. Almost maybe bragging in some sort of sense. It could be, yeah.
I can see why why this is kind of a climactic point and why we look at this verse within this context, because if you switch it the other way, it's actually, I feel like you have a positive connotation with our understanding now, where we are washed and redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. So it's like, yeah, let that be on me, because that is forgiveness, that is grace, but it's completely different here.
Yeah, that's why this verse is so incredible. You just completely hit it, because at its face, it's showing how first-generation Palestinian people did not understand who Christ was. They didn't understand what they're saying when they say, hey, his blood be on us and our children, crucify him. They don't understand who he is, but they say, his blood be on us and our children, and that's exactly right. Yeah, we all want that. His blood should be on us and our children, because we want to be redeemed in his blood. And that's just a huge salvific divine irony that Matthew imposes here. And he does that 100% intentionally. He knew what he was writing. And now we can read that today, and certainly the early Christians would have read that too and probably gotten that right away. And then when we read it today, it just rings even more true for us that, yes, his blood should be on us, and it should be on our children, and we're redeemed and washed in his blood so that we can live as children with him. Any other thoughts on that before? Yeah.
Having had that incident with the soldiers in Gethsemane, that would have been enough that you wonder why the disciples weren't on this. They probably feared for their lives. Like, they took in Jesus. There's lots of soldiers. They know they had been following him. They're probably next on the list. So they're going to be silent for fear of their own lives during this action. So they don't get a chance to stand up either.
Right. Yeah, that's perhaps true as well. The disciples were, they just saw Jesus be arrested, and so now they're fearing for their own lives, which certainly makes sense. And it's funny because they are the ones kind of running away, and then it's all very ironic. They're the ones who are running away, but should be there. The people who should be like fearing Christ are the ones who are there crucifying him and saying, his blood be on us and our children, when that is exactly what the disciples should be saying and what everybody should be saying to Christ and to God. Really, his blood be on us and our children. It's just a big, I don't know. I don't know if you guys can see the joy that I have with this text. It's just so much fun to read. When you see that, just that little thing behind the text, it just gives it a whole new meaning. A whole new personal meaning to you, specifically, that yes, his blood should be on you and your children. Any other thoughts? Very good, very good. Well, then on that the last verse then, before we wrap up. So he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him over to be crucified. So Pilate, he's been trying to be innocent this entire time, but in that last verse, he exercises his authority and delivers over Jesus to be crucified. He's the one who says, yeah, he should be crucified. And yet, this authority is all subservient to God and what his plan is. And this is a constant pattern that we see really throughout all the Bible studies we've been doing, through a closer look at Passion Week. It's all really been about God's authority and how everything is falling under that, leading to the cross. Whether it be the disciples who do not recognize Christ at their time, Peter, who rejects Christ 3 times, the Jewish leaders who constantly condemn him, or Pontius Pilate, who delivers him over to be crucified in order just to keep the peace. They all agree with God and his authority that Jesus needs to be crucified. And so another easy take home is that, yeah, God's authority is above all. It transcends our understanding, it transcends what we want, and and it's always working for our good. Even when we see for the people, in this narrative who just say, yeah, may his blood be on us and our children. In their minds, they're calling for, they're bragging almost that, yeah, they'll take all the guilt. But really, God's authority overall is working that blood to be redeeming for them, which is just super special and super awesome. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up here? Yeah.
It just kind of reminds me how, when you were saying God's an authority above everybody, but he gives us free will to make the choice versus, like in the Garden of Eden, he said, this is here, don't do it, but he didn't put any like fence around it or anything. He just put it there, told them what to do, and then let them decide.
Right.
And this is kind of like he did through Pilate in Jesus' trial. The people could have said, we're going to choose Jesus or whatever instead of Barabbas, but they chose unwisely. But God still worked his plan through all their bad choices.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. God always works. God works his plans despite what we do. I think is a nice little proverb, maybe to take home. Is that God? And furthermore, God loves us despite what we do, despite our free will, in that we choose terrible things away from him. Right? God still works that faith in us because he loves us, and he works through the sin and the evil in the story in order to bring us salvation, which is really awesome. Yeah.
The disciples, they denied him. But later on in life, they gave their lives they were all martyred, I think, except one.
Yep.
And standing up for Jesus.
Yeah, that's exactly right too. And another example would be the disciples who deny Christ and then are his tools for spreading the gospel to the far reaches of the earth, and they all are martyred, yeah, but like you said, except for John. So another great example of God's authority. We are all subservient to God's authority, but he knows what's going on. He's in control. With that, let's pray. Holy Father, we thank you for sending your son, Jesus, to endure the trial of Pontius Pilate and to not plead innocent when he was, in order that we who are guilty might be redeemed in him and his blood. I pray that, once again, you be with us throughout this Holy Week. Guide our hearts and minds to be fully set on you and everything that your Son, Jesus, did for us on that cross. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Thanks for coming. Thanks for watching online. And, yeah, have a great